Sarah Chen had been looking forward to this Sunday morning for weeks. After an exhausting month of back-to-back real estate closings and a particularly nasty property dispute case, she finally had a day to herself. The autumn sun streamed through her carefully restored Victorian windows, casting warm patterns across her hardwood floors as she savored her first sip of hand-ground coffee. Her phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Sarah ignored it, determined to enjoy her moment of peace. Then it started ringing, her sister's familiar ringtone filling the quiet space. "Since when are you selling your house?" Jennifer's voice crackled through the speaker, a mix of confusion and hurt. "I had to find out through Mom's friend's daughter who saw it on Zillow." Sarah nearly dropped her coffee mug. "What are you talking about? I'm not selling my house." "Well, someone is," Jennifer replied. "There are 30 photos up here, including ones from yesterday. The listing says motivated seller, historic gem ready for new owners, priced to sell quickly. It's listed at $425,000. Sarah's stomach dropped. She paid $625,000 for the house 2 years ago and had spent another $80,000 on historically accurate renovations. "That's impossible," she muttered, already opening her laptop. "Send me the link." As her computer whirred to life, more notifications began flooding her phone. 3 emails from her real estate agent friends asking if she needed referrals. A text from her mother demanding to know why she was moving back to Cincinnati. 2 messages from unknown numbers asking about viewing times. The Zillow listing loaded and Sarah felt her lawyer brain kick into high gear, cataloging every detail even as her personal sense of violation grew. Her house, her meticulously maintained, lovingly restored 1890s Victorian, was indeed for sale. The photos were recent. They showed the new copper gutters she'd installed last week. The listing description was full of red flags: no agent name, no brokerage information, just a contact form and an email address that looked suspiciously generic. A car slowed in front of her house. Through her front window, Sarah watched a middle-aged couple peer at her home, phones held up like they were comparing the real thing to the online photos. Behind them, a woman in a blazer was opening her car trunk, pulling out what looked suspiciously like a for sale sign. Sarah glanced down at her coffee-stained pajamas and fuzzy slippers. This was not how she'd planned to spend her Sunday, but 4 years of handling real estate disputes had taught her the importance of acting quickly. She grabbed her phone, opened her voice recorder app, and headed for the front door. As she reached for the handle, another notification popped up, this time from Realtor.com. Her house was now listed there too, with a different email contact, and the price had mysteriously dropped another $25,000 in the last 10 minutes. Sarah's hand paused on the doorknob as a familiar car crept past her house. She'd seen that beige Lexus SUV before, with its distinctive HOA vanity plate. Patricia Morrison, the newly elected Homeowners Association president, was driving by at a snail's pace while her passenger snapped photos. Everything clicked into place. The unauthorized listing, the unrealistic price, the sudden appearance of prospective buyers. Sarah had heard rumors about Patricia's aggressive approach to maintaining neighborhood standards, but this was beyond anything she'd imagined. As she watched Patricia's car disappear around the corner, Sarah allowed herself a small, grim smile. If Patricia wanted to play real estate games, she'd chosen the wrong homeowner to target. But first, Sarah needed to deal with the realtor who was now hammering a for sale sign into her front lawn. She opened her front door, voice recorder running, and stepped out into the crisp autumn morning. "Excuse me," she called out, her courtroom voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I believe we need to have a conversation about unauthorized property listings." After spending 2 hours convincing 3 separate realtors that her house wasn't actually for sale, Sarah retreated to her home office. The space, a converted sunroom that had sparked so many of Patricia's historical integrity complaints, now served as her command center. She pushed aside a stack of client files and opened her laptop, ready to dig deeper. The first red flag appeared in Patricia's HOA newsletters. Sarah had archived every single one since moving in, a habit from her early days in real estate law when a single memo had won her a major case. She arranged them chronologically on her desk, creating a timeline that made her blood run cold. March 2023. The charm of our neighborhood rests in its cohesive character. Certain recent paint choices on Maple Street have raised concerns. April 2023. The Martinez family's sage green Victorian suddenly listed and sold. July 2023. Modern modifications, particularly visible from the street, degrade our historical value. August 2023. The Thompsons' renovated wraparound porch was cited for violations, their house sold within weeks. Each passive-aggressive column preceded a house sale by exactly 1 month. Sarah grabbed her phone and opened LinkedIn, searching for Amy Martinez. Within minutes, she had a response to her message. I've been waiting for someone to ask. We didn't want to leave, but the fines kept coming. Every day, something new. Our daughter's bicycle on the porch. Fine. A flower pot the wrong shade of terracotta. Fine. When our house appeared on multiple listing sites, we thought we were going crazy. Patricia kept bringing prospective buyers by, claiming she had standing permission as HOA president. We couldn't fight it. We both work full-time, have 3 kids, and the legal fees would have been impossible. Sarah's hands shook as she typed notes. The Thompsons proved harder to track down, but their former next-door neighbor provided a goldmine of information through a carefully worded email exchange. Dave Thompson worked from home like you do. Patricia claimed his home office violated the historical spirit of the neighborhood. Then their garbage cans disappeared. Their mail got mixed up. Their guests' cars were towed without warning. The last straw was when their property insurance got canceled because someone reported dangerous structural issues that didn't exist. They lost their mortgage rate lock and had to sell fast. A pattern emerged. Young families, modern improvements, quick sales under pressure. Sarah pulled up the property records. All public information, though few people knew how to access it. The buyers for both houses had shell company names. More digging revealed a common thread. All were managed by the same local property investment firm. A notification popped up on Sarah's screen. Another unauthorized listing, this time on a smaller real estate website. She was about to close it when something caught her eye. The contact email used a familiar format, pmorrison_HOA@website.com. Gotcha, Sarah whispered, taking screenshots. Patricia wasn't just harassing homeowners, she was acting as an unlicensed real estate agent, a serious violation of state law. Her doorbell rang. Sarah checked her security camera to see Karen Davis, her elderly neighbor from across the street, clutching what looked like old papers. I saw what happened this morning, Karen said when Sarah opened the door. Her hands trembled as she handed over a yellowed stack of HOA documents. I've been on the board for 30 years. Patricia's daughter, she works for one of those real estate websites. They think nobody knows, but I keep records of everything. Look at the last page. Sarah flipped to the back. There it was, a memorandum of understanding between the HOA and a property management company, signed 3 years ago. The company representative's signature was clear. Elizabeth Morrison, Patricia's daughter. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Sarah stared at the document. She'd expected to find evidence of HOA overreach. Instead, she'd stumbled onto something much bigger and much more sinister. Would you like some tea, Karen? Sarah asked, mind already racing through state real estate statutes. I think we have a lot to discuss. The Bell Street coffee shop was Patricia Morrison's unofficial seat of power. Every Tuesday morning from 8 to 10, she held court at the corner table, a spot that offered a perfect view of both the street and the shop's entrance. Sarah had watched this ritual play out for months, noting how homeowners would casually stop by to plead their cases for renovation approvals or dispute violation notices. Today, Sarah chose her timing carefully. She arrived at 9:15, Patricia's usual second coffee lull, wearing her best courtroom pantsuit and carrying a leather portfolio filled with meticulously organized evidence. The familiar scent of roasted beans and pastries filled the air as she pushed open the door, triggering the small brass bell above. Patricia sat in her usual spot, a half-eaten scone, and a tablet displaying property listings on the table before her. 3 other HOA board members huddled nearby, clutching their coffee cups like shields. The morning sunlight streamed through the shop's vintage windows, catching the silver streaks in Patricia's perfectly coiffed bob. Good morning, Patricia, Sarah said, approaching the table with a practiced smile. Do you have a moment to discuss some real estate matters? Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly, but her social mask remained firmly in place. Sarah, dear. How lovely to see you taking a break from your home office. She gestured to an empty chair with exaggerated graciousness. Pleased join me. Sarah settled into the seat, noting how the cafe had grown oddly quiet. Even the espresso machine's hiss seemed muted. I wanted to discuss some interesting listings I've discovered, she began, laying out printed screenshots on the table. It seems my house has appeared on multiple real estate websites without my knowledge or consent. The HOA has broad authority to address property concerns, Patricia replied, her voice carrying just enough to reach the curious ears around them. Perhaps if you'd attended more meetings, you'd understand our procedures better. Sarah maintained her professional demeanor as she placed another document on the table. I'm quite familiar with HOA procedures, Patricia. I'm also familiar with state real estate laws regarding unauthorized listings and unlicensed agent activities. She paused, sliding forward a particular screenshot. Like this listing posted through your daughter Elizabeth's work credentials. The color drained from Patricia's face, but she recovered quickly. You've been causing problems since you moved in. That garish home office, those modern light fixtures, you're destroying the historical character of our neighborhood. Someone had to take action. By illegally listing their homes for sale, Sarah asked, her voice level but firm. Like you did with the Martinez family and the Thompsons? Patricia's hand tightened around her coffee cup. I have protected this neighborhood for 15 years. Every decision I make is for the greater good. You and your type come in here, thinking you can modernize and modify as you please. My type? Sarah interrupted, raising an eyebrow. Several nearby patrons shifted uncomfortably. Young people who don't respect tradition. Patricia's voice rose sharply. Who think they can run a business from a historic home, who paint their doors unauthorized colors. Colors approved by the Historical Society, Sarah corrected, sliding another document forward. Just like my home office renovation, which received all proper permits and approvals. Would you like to see the documentation? Patricia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I don't need to see your paperwork. I know what's best for this neighborhood. Her hand jerked forward, sending her coffee cup flying. Hot liquid splashed across the table, soaking the documents and spotting Sarah's white blouse. The cafe fell silent. Several phones rose to record the scene as Patricia continued her tirade, her voice reaching a fever pitch. Ungrateful homeowners like you are ruining everything. I have every right to protect our property values. Sarah calmly retrieved a tissue from her purse, dabbing at her blouse. Actually, Patricia, she said quietly, what you've done is illegal. As your lawyer will soon explain to you. She gestured to the coffee shop's security cameras. And now it's all on record. The brass bell chimed again as a uniformed police officer entered, summoned by the cafe owner's discreet call. Patricia's face contorted as realization dawned. She had just assaulted a lawyer in front of 24 witnesses, multiple phone cameras, and security footage. Sarah gathered her damp documents, nodding to the officer. I believe Ms. Morrison has something she'd like to report, she said, standing to leave. And I'll be keeping these coffee-stained documents as evidence. Good day, Patricia. Sarah's mailbox had always been unremarkable, a standard black metal box mounted beside her front door. But in the 3 days following the coffee shop incident, it became a repository of secrets. The first note appeared Tuesday evening, tucked between a power bill and a takeout menu. Patricia fined us $500 for having a satellite dish. When we proved it was covered by FCC regulations, she reported us to the city for a non-existent fence violation, 478 Oak Street. By Wednesday morning there were 3 more. She threatened to put a lion on our house because our Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past the January 2nd deadline. We had the flu. The Jacobsons. Our garden gnome collection disappeared overnight. Patricia sent us a notice about unauthorized lawn ornaments the next day, 227 Maple. She tried to block our adopted daughter's lemonade stand, claiming it violated zoning laws. Anonymous. Sarah created a secure digital Dropbox, printing business cards with the anonymous submission link and quietly slipping them to neighbors during her morning runs. The stories poured in, dozens of them, each more outrageous than the last. She documented everything meticulously, her dining room table becoming a command center of color-coded folders and timeline charts. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated her campaign. A professional photography crew appeared one morning, taking detailed shots of Sarah's property. Historical documentation, they claimed, though Sarah noticed they seemed particularly interested in photographing her garbage bins and the slight paint peeling on her north-facing window trim. The HOA violation notices began arriving daily. Unapproved shade of white on window frames, non-period appropriate door hinges, excessive foot traffic suggesting unauthorized business activity, modern mail slot compromising historical integrity. Sarah watched through her security cameras as Patricia personally delivered each notice, always accompanied by someone filming on a phone. The performance aspect wasn't lost on her. Patricia was building her own documentation. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During a late-night research session, Sarah discovered that Patricia's daughter Elizabeth didn't just work for the real estate website, she was their regional listing verification supervisor. A deep dive into local property records revealed a pattern. Homes that received multiple HOA violations often ended up listed through Elizabeth's office, usually selling to one of 3 property management companies. Sarah created a private online forum for the neighborhood, requiring identity verification to join. Within days, 68 households had signed up. The stories shared there painted a picture of a carefully orchestrated campaign of harassment and property manipulation. Has anyone else noticed that violations increase right before the quarterly property value assessments? Posted one neighbor. My cousin's a realtor, wrote another. She says those management companies flip the houses with historical renovations and sell them for 40% more. The forum became a safe space for sharing Patricia-related intelligence. Members posted daily updates about her movements, documented her interactions, and shared legal resources. Sarah watched as her neighbors, previously isolated by fear, began connecting and supporting each other. Then came the anonymous email that changed everything. I work in Elizabeth Morrison's office. You should know that Patricia has been using her daughter's login credentials to post unauthorized listings for years. I've attached screenshots of the access logs. I can't come forward officially. I need this job, but this has to stop. The attached files were a goldmine of evidence: access timestamps, IP addresses, listing modifications, all traceable to Patricia's home computer and mobile devices. As Sarah reviewed the documents, her phone buzzed. A new violation notice had just been slipped under her door. Immediate action required. Unauthorized home business operation. Final warning before legal action. Sarah smiled grimly as she added the notice to her evidence folder. Patricia was playing checkers in a chess game, not realizing she'd already lost. But before Sarah could make her next move, she needed to understand why the stakes were so high. What was Patricia really getting out of all this? The answer arrived that evening in a plain brown envelope containing bank statements and property records that would blow the whole case wide open. The heritage room of the public library hadn't changed in 50 years, all oak panels and brass fixtures, with the musty scent of old books permeating the air. Sarah arrived early, settling into a seat near the back where she could observe the room filling with curious neighbors and historical society board members. Patricia stood at the podium, arranging her materials with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. The projector hummed to life, displaying a photo of Sarah's home office edition. As you can see, Patricia began, her voice dripping with rehearsed concern. This modern appendage drastically alters the original 1890s silhouette of the home. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, the visiting architectural historian Patricia had brought in as her expert witness, adjusted her glasses as she studied the images. She was known for her stringent preservation standards, Patricia's ace in the hole. Ms. Morrison, Dr. Blackwood interrupted, could you show the side-angle view again? Patricia smiled triumphantly, clicking back to the previous slide. Notice the contemporary windows. Fascinating, Dr. Blackwood cut in. This is actually one of the most thoughtful historical adaptations I've seen in recent years. The owner has maintained the original proportions while incorporating period-appropriate materials. Look at the matching brick pattern. They've even recreated the original mortar mix. The room stirred. Patricia's smile froze. But the modern elements are brilliantly integrated, Dr. Blackwood continued, warming to her subject. The windows, for instance, use salvaged Victorian-era frames with modern energy-efficient glass. It's exactly the kind of sustainable preservation we advocate for in contemporary historical conservation. Sarah watched as Patricia's composure cracked. But it's not authentic to the period. Actually, Dr. Blackwood said, pulling up her own laptop, I took the liberty of researching this property's history. The original house had a physician's home office in exactly the same location. It was removed in the 1940s. This addition is essentially a historically accurate restoration. Patricia's hands gripped the podium. That's impossible. I tried to add a sunroom in the same spot 5 years ago, and you people rejected it. The room fell silent. Dr. Blackwood raised an eyebrow. Ah yes, I remember that proposal. She connected her laptop to the projector. Perhaps we should review it. The screen filled with Patricia's old renovation plans. Gone was any pretense of historical accuracy. The design showed a modern sunroom with aluminum frames and floor-to-ceiling windows, completely out of character with the neighborhood's Victorian aesthetic. Your proposal was rejected, Dr. Blackwood explained, because it ignored basic preservation guidelines. The current owner's design, however, shows remarkable attention to historical detail. In fact, I'd like to submit it to the National Register as an example of proper modernization within historical constraints. Patricia's face flushed dark red. This is ridiculous. She's running a business from a residential property. She's destroying property values. She fumbled with her folder, sending papers scattering across the floor. Sarah stood up quietly. Dr. Blackwood, would you be interested in seeing the original builder's documents? I found them in the library archives while researching the property's history. As Sarah walked forward with the yellowed papers, Patricia spun to face her. You think you're so clever with your permits and your research. But you don't understand what's at stake. This neighborhood is my legacy. I won't let you ruin it with your modern ideas and your home office and your attempted sunroom renovation wasn't the only thing that was rejected, was it, Patricia? Sarah asked softly. Would you like to tell everyone about the luxury condo development plans you tried to push through last year? The ones that would have demolished 3 historic homes. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Patricia's face went from red to white. The real estate schemes, the targeted harassment, the unauthorized listings, it had never been about historical preservation. It had been about revenge, control, and a failed property development deal that would have made Patricia millions. Dr. Blackwood cleared her throat. I believe we should continue this discussion with the State Historical Preservation Office present, and perhaps, she added, looking pointedly at Patricia's scattered papers, a real estate attorney. Sarah sat in her home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by the soft glow of her laptop and 3 monitors. On the left screen, she reviewed the complaint she'd filed with the State Real Estate Commission under her colleague James Chen's name. The middle monitor displayed Patricia's HOA violation notices, meticulously annotated. The right screen showed a live feed from her security cameras. Patricia had taken to doing late-night property inspections. Got you, Sarah whispered, watching Patricia's beige Lexus crawl past her house for the 3rd time that night. The camera's infrared mode clearly showed someone in the passenger seat photographing her property. All documented, all time-stamped, all perfect for the cease and desist letter she was preparing. Her phone buzzed, a secure message from Elizabeth Morrison's coworker. Used ease login again. Listed another house on Oak Street, sending screenshots now. Sarah added the evidence to her growing digital archive. Patricia was getting sloppy, probably feeling the pressure from the Historical Society debacle. The next move had to be perfect. The emergency HOA meeting Patricia had called for tomorrow night would be her undoing. Sarah had spent weeks preparing, laying groundwork so subtle that even her closest allies didn't know the full plan. She opened her email and began executing Phase 1. To HOA board members, individually addressed. Subject: Urgent legal notice. Personal liability in HOA actions. Attachment: legal_brief_Morrison_cases.pif. Dear Board Member, this confidential legal brief outlines your personal liability exposure in recent HOA actions. As the enclosed cases demonstrate, board members can be held individually responsible for damages when they failed to prevent unauthorized actions by HOA officers. Your prompt attention is crucial. Regards, Sarah Chen, Esquire. She sent 12 identical emails, knowing each board member would think they alone had received the warning. Human nature and self-preservation would do the rest. Her phone started ringing within minutes. Board member Carl Peterson was first. Ms. Chen, I had no idea about the unauthorized listings. Patricia said she had authority. Then Margaret Wu. My husband's a banker. We can't risk personal liability. What do you suggest? By sunrise, she'd fielded 9 calls. Each board member received the same measured response. I recommend reviewing all materials before tomorrow's meeting. Pay particular attention to voting records on property actions. Sarah finally allowed herself 3 hours of sleep before heading to the courthouse. She filed 3 separate complaints under different attorneys' names, each attacking Patricia's actions from a different angle. The Real Estate Commission would investigate the unauthorized listings. The State Bar would examine potential fraud. The county property assessor would audit recent sales patterns. Back home, her neighborhood intelligence network reported Patricia was unraveling. She'd spent 2 hours arguing with her daughter Elizabeth on her front porch. 3 separate board members had been seen entering Patricia's house carrying thick folders. A moving truck had delivered packing boxes to Patricia's garage. At 4 p.m., Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth Morrison stood on her porch, clutching a USB drive. I can't let her destroy my career, Elizabeth said, hands shaking. Everything's on here, the login records, the property company kickbacks, the offshore accounts. She used my credentials to list 15 houses in 3 years. Sarah nodded sympathetically. Would you be willing to make a formal statement? Elizabeth glanced nervously at Patricia's house across the park. She's my mother. But, she pulled out her phone, showing an email. She just tried to pin everything on me. Said I was the one listing properties without authorization. I see, Sarah said quietly. Why did you come in? We should discuss your options before tomorrow's meeting. As they entered her home office, Sarah's phone lit up with urgent messages from 4 more board members. Patricia had just called an emergency pre-meeting for 7 p.m. tonight, likely hoping to outmaneuver whatever Sarah had planned. Sarah smiled, opening her laptop. Patricia was playing right into her hands. Sometimes the best legal strategy was simply giving your opponent enough rope to hang themselves, and Patricia was about to put on quite a show. The community center's meeting room was packed 15 minutes before the scheduled 7 p.m. start. Sarah sat quietly in the back row, watching the scene unfold. A local news crew was setting up their equipment. She'd tipped them off about a heartwarming story on historical preservation in tight-knit communities. The reporter, Jenny Martinez, had jumped at the opportunity, especially after Sarah mentioned her own family had been forced out of the neighborhood 2 years ago. Patricia swept in at 6:55, her usual confidence somewhat frayed. Her perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her papers at the podium. The board members, usually clustered around her, sat in a conspicuous line along the side wall, their faces carefully neutral. I call this emergency meeting to order, Patricia announced, her voice carrying a slight edge. We're here to discuss urgent property maintenance standards and, she glanced at the news crew, straightening her spine, our commitment to preserving our neighborhood's historical character. Sarah watched as Patricia launched into a clearly rehearsed speech about property values and community standards. The camera's red light blinked steadily, recording every word. And now, Patricia continued, I'd like to present evidence of ongoing violations that threaten our neighborhood's integrity. She clicked her presentation remote, and Sarah's house appeared on the screen. This property with its unauthorized modern modifications. Point of order, Sarah called out, standing. The room fell silent. Before we continue, I believe we should address some irregularities in recent HOA actions. Patricia's finger tightened on the remote. This is not the appropriate time. Actually, Board member Carl Peterson interrupted. I move to hear Ms. Chen's concerns. 5 other board members quickly seconded. Sarah walked to the front, placing her laptop on the podium beside Patricia. Let's start with something simple, she said, connecting to the projector. Like why our HOA president has been listing homes for sale without owner authorization. The screen filled with documentation. Login records, timestamps, IP addresses. Patricia's face went pale. These unauthorized listings, Sarah continued, consistently appeared after homeowners received multiple violation notices. Interestingly, most properties were purchased by 3 specific management companies. She clicked to the next slide. Companies partially owned by Patricia Morrison through offshore accounts. The news crew leaned forward, cameras rolling as Sarah methodically laid out the evidence. Screenshots of Patricia using her daughter's credentials. Bank records showing kickbacks from property sales, emails discussing plans to drive down property values for strategic acquisitions. This was never about historical preservation, Sarah concluded. It was about forcing out homeowners who refused to sell to Patricia's development scheme. These are lies, Patricia shouted, but her voice cracked. I have protected this neighborhood. I have maintained standards. I have used your position to harass homeowners who wouldn't sell. Elizabeth Morrison's voice cut through the room as she stood up from her seat near the door, including threatening to blame me for your illegal listings. The room erupted in chaos. Homeowners began sharing stories of harassment. Board members produced copies of Sarah's legal briefs. The reporter was rapidly taking notes, her cameraman capturing every moment. Patricia grabbed her papers, knocking over a water pitcher in her haste. This meeting is adjourned. Actually, board member Margaret Wu interjected. I move for an immediate vote on HOA leadership. The other board members nodded grimly. Sarah watched as Patricia finally realized the full extent of her defeat. The cameras were rolling, her daughter had turned against her, and her own board was about to vote her out. You, Patricia hissed, turning to Sarah. You planned this all along. You and your lawyer tricks. No, Patricia, Sarah replied calmly. I just made sure everyone saw the truth. And speaking of truth, she nodded to the back of the room, where 2 police officers had just entered. I believe these gentlemen would like to discuss some real estate licensing violations with you.